Very good evening, my friends. I hope you are there on YouTube watching us. I would like to extend my sincere thanks, for being here today. And, we have very interesting topic today because, as you know, I have told you before that we have something to do with interpreting. Now, interpreting itself is a big, word. Many people confuse it with translation. Many people find it, another topic. Now, the fundamentals are that we are like, trying to understand today that what is interpretation, And now I recall interpretation has, in scholarly pursuits. In India, when there was no concept of what we call translation, there was more of a concept of, Rupantar, which has direct relationship with interpreting. Even in ancient world, in Western philosophy, Aristotle, Plato, and all these big number of philosophers, great philosophers, they used to interpret a variety of concepts, including morality, including ethics, values, and also the religious texts for, intellectual discussions, as well as they were trying to find out solutions to the problems of life, including politics, including spiritualism, including personal satisfaction, economics, family relations, the ethics and values that a king should follow. King used to be considered as descendant of the god, so his words were considered to be the godly words. All these concepts were there at that phase of time in the Western world. In India, I tell you, this is the reality. If you go through the scriptures, you will find that our scriptures has always told us, explained us to be rational and even question gods. And you will find lots of books written in which the god is, has taken form of human being and is talking to nature, or talking to an individual, or talking to even a child or a wife or a warrior or a king. For example, if you look at Bhagavad Gita, Krishna has taken his, the god Krishna has come to earth and participated in the war, Mahabharata. And when the whole destruction takes place and is about to, major destruction is about to come, Krishna talks to, Arjun, and he explains life. That is Gita, And whatever has been explained 5,000 years ago, has been kind of interpreted in different forms. Similarly, Ramayana, Mahabharata of, Indian system, it has certain values and interpreted differently by different people. Similarly, lots of literary books, classics we call, like Kalidas Sakuntala, or Ved Vyas, or Tulsi, Ramcharitmanas, all, you will find variety. Similarly, in the stories of Ramayana from north has totally a different story, and when it reaches south, it is totally a different story. In southern part, still Ravan is being worshipped. So these are all part of life that helps us. And as Preeti, Dr. Preeti, who has done her PhD in interpreting civil, explained it to you what interpretation is. It has more to do with the verbal thing. You listen, and then explain in different language. Earlier, interpretation used to be, done by disciples of God or Allah, who used to explain his desire to control the world, or let the world live through preachings. And these disciples, or the person who used to be the messenger, used to speak whatever the Allah used to tell him, or the God used to tell him. Even in India, we call किसी के जिह्वा पे सरस्वती आ गई, and जो कुछ भी उसके माइंड में आया वो बोलता गया, and वो मान लेते थे कि भाई God has sent the message, right? And then people used to interpret it. That's another part of interpretation. Or even today, when somebody talks and when you explain it from different angle, similarly when you look at one point and explain it from different points, they're all interpretations. But when we are talking about interpretation in bilingual terms, in a context of facilitating conversation between two people or two groups of people who talk in two different languages, including sign interpreting, or including those languages which nobody or very few people know. I recall one of our, speakers in a conference when we had organized on role of translation in nation building. Dr. and Professor John C. James, she was the Vice Chancellor of Central University of Kerala. She even talks that, mother is the best translator as well as interpreter, because mother understands the child, when the child is in the womb, and then when child comes out, mother understands when child is hungry, when child is, angry, when child is very happy. In the beginning, when the child is growing, mother, interprets child's action and thoughts and behavior, So this is another form of interpretation, my friends. Similarly, when somebody is sad and who is very close to you, a friend, or maybe family relations, brother, sister, wife, daughter, husband, without saying even a single word, you interpret something out of him. Similarly, when you go out of house and you start interacting with people, every time we interpret. So my friends, today we have gathered here to talk about the language interpretation, and we have with us two great and smart scholars as well as experts who are conference interpreters, who are translators, who are consecutive interpreters, and who are all in one, and they are trainers as well. They are one of the pioneers, I will say, interpreters of India, and they have added great value to conference interpreting. And one is Madam Padma Natrajan, another one is Dr. Preeti Bhatia. And among all these, we have a very dynamic and a versatile intern who is also a linguist, who is going to give a presentation on how to make a good career in interpreting. He aspires to be an interpreter. And luckily, I also have been doing interpretation for consecutive as well as simultaneous. And, I do experiments, as you know. And out of doing many experiments, I have done one experiment of training, live media interpreters. Means when the live, telecast is going on about a news, such as, for example, domestic or international news, political as well as economic, and a person is giving news anchor is giving news in, let's say, in English. So the idea is that if after lots of efforts, if the news has come out, in English, why not reach out to people in other languages too, simultaneously? So when you go live on a channel doing interpretation of the anchor, and simultaneously that particular news is heard in Hindi, Tamil, Telugu, Marathi, Punjabi, English, or any foreign languages, including Spanish, French, German, Italian, Korean. This is what is called live media interpreting. This kind of experiment has not been done too much, in the world, because it is very complicated and it needs lots of coordination. But luckily, I was part of, a training program for G News for their channel called Beyond, and luckily that experiment was successful, and they have already launched the live interpreting program from English to Hindi. You can switch over to that channel, So now the most important part comes when we are talking about interpreting is how translation and interpretation go together. See, translation has more to do with written text, and interpretation has more to do with verbal interpretation. Many times you get time to think, many times you don't get time to think and wait. And it's this particular, the way translation also has variety of forms, including transcription, including, quick translation, machine translation, memory translation, and whatnot, cloud translation. Similarly, interpretation has also certain forms, including telephone interpreting, whispering, interpreting for a VIP, interpreting for a family, interpreting for a doctor, interpreting during live operation in operation theater, doing helping people in distress, helping people during calamity and disasters, providing medical aids, providing legal aids, providing military aids, providing operational support when there is an attack going on between two countries. These are all forms of interpreting. Similarly, trying to interpret the ideas of a political prisoner, trying to interpret, people who are down to earth and who are deprived people and who are suffering, and there is a, help needed there. You will find variety of these forms, that comes where you have to do live interpreting with the people, with the crowd, and it is called consecutive at times. When you do simultaneous, one without any gap, it is called simultaneous. When you do consecutive, when you wait and then the speaker speaks, then it is consecutive. Similarly, now the customer cares executives are tuned to become telephone interpreters, in the sense you are not sitting in a customer care center, rather you are having your own mobile phone, and when there is a call that comes, based on the priority, the call is diverted to your phone, and you start interpreting to the person who is there in need. This is called tourism interpretation on telephone. I recall the government of India has introduced this, and we Modlingua has provided kind of placement services for Tata Group, which is heading this kind of operation for government of India for tourism department. So I recall Veena, as another, translator as well as interpreter, was doing some kind of placement activities for cruise interpreting. When somebody is on cruise traveling, there you need some good interpreters to help tourists enjoy the beauty and scenic beauties of other parts of the country, where for example, if you go to Italy, you need someone. Similarly, some part of unexplored region where people do not speak that language too much. For example, there are languages in Andaman Nicobar. There are languages where people do not want to allow anyone to get in. Many times people are not, those languages are not written, they're totally verbal languages. So interpreters play important role. Preeti has done some research and she was explaining that there was interpretation activity even during Harappan culture. And I recall when conquistadores, from Spain and Portugal reached Latin America, to discover or to kind of find a new route to India, and they landed up in Latin America. There they got hold of, local people, and they learned the language and became interpreter, and through, knowledge sharing started at that point of time, and then slowly they were able to get into the veins of Latin American society, culture, political and economic, everything. Same thing has happened in Indian context also, when anthropologists and these business people from East India Company came to India, and they started interacting with locals. They learned language, and they exploited India to large extent. Similarly, if you recall in South, when they had come, they had introduced the wine, the beer, with these quinine, malaria. And that's why you find, in Bangalore region, lots of beverages there, and mining sector, people living in jungles, unexplored areas. They reached everywhere, wherever there were money. Who were doing all this, process of exchange of information, they were all being done through interpreting activity. So the way translators, play important role in society, similarly, interpreters too play equally important role, but interpreters have more bigger challenges, because there you have to speak, and translation you can think of, you can wait for some time, you can explore the dictionary. But when you are doing interpretation and you start looking into dictionary, the purpose of interpretation gets obstructed. So the cognitive load in the mind of, interpreter is very high, and one has to be very, very, concentrating on the work. If you have fickle mind, if you deviate, you are lost. So, the composition of interpreter, the thought process has to be controlled, very disciplined, and for that many people do meditation. Padma and Preeti will tell you how important these aspects are, to remain focused on what is being talked. Otherwise you can create a big disaster. Can you imagine if a Prime Minister Modi is talking about India-China relations, and at that phase of time you get lost for a fraction of a second, and you start thinking about, daydreaming at that phase of time about some fancy activity, or a mall where you are visiting with your family, etc. So your mind, gets diverted for 30 seconds, and the India and China relationship get instead of becoming better, goes worse. And there are chances you may end up talking something which is very absurd and nonsense, and the person who is there, can create a big diplomatic problem for the whole region, and many times for the whole world. There has been times, because of interpretation, wrong interpretation, wars have taken place. This example you will find, wrong interpretation has led to Mahabharata war. When Draupadi communicated little differently, and the Pandavas got furious and they entered into a fighting mode. If Draupadi wanted, she could have controlled the interpretation of what was done to her, and then perhaps the course of action could have been different. So my friends, I would like to welcome, all of you to our session today. And I now see lots of people have already joined in at our, YouTube channel, and I would like to thank all of them, number one, and would like to welcome them, number two, and request them, if they find this session interesting, please do share it with your friends in social media. And I see Mr. Silvan, Paneed, Selvame, Akash, Prachi, Mehak, Harpreet, Regis, Atya, Suraj, Kanika, Sharmila Bakshi, Drishti, Priyali from China, Taiwan, Rushali, Riddhi, Garvita, all watching us. And I would like to express my sincere thanks on behalf of the panel, my friends, that you are here. If you have any doubt, thanks for joining Iris from Germany. Thank you very much, all my friends. Milton Power is there. So I see lots of people are already watching us, and they will be sharing our thoughts on social media. Will attract many people. And thank you, Vijay Gupta ji. And I would also like to request you to subscribe to our channel if you have not yet subscribed, so that you keep receiving our updates instantly, because this, community learning training program, which is free of cost for everybody, we invite, industry experts who are also passionate about contributing their bit to our profession. So today we have with us a very versatile trainer for French, Padma Natrajan. We have Preeti Bhatia, a very good, well-known scholar, and Ashok, our intern, who has put lots of efforts in preparing this webinar for you, my friends. So I welcome them on board. So now over to Ashok, please. Ashok, you have to unmute yourself.
Yeah.
And then.
So am I audible, sir?
Yes.
Okay. So hello, everyone. My name is Ashok Khanduri, and I am currently a summer intern at Modlingua, and I am pursuing my honors in French and Francophone Studies from Doon University, Uttarakhand, and this is my last semester. So before I start, I would like to thank the whole Modlingua team for having offered me this place as a presenter for this webinar on interpretation. And it's really a matter of great honor for me because I'm sharing this platform with our panelists, our mentors who are great scholars. So being a student, I think I'm highly obliged. So if our moderator, Mr. Ravi sir, allows, may I start the presentation?
Please go ahead.
Yeah. So before we jump into what exactly are the opportunities for interpreters, let's explore what exactly interpretation is. So interpretation is simply a process of breaking the language barrier between two or multiple people or parties who are not sharing a common language. So with the help of interpretation, the interpreters establish an effective communication link between them. Now, interpreters, they actually convey a message from a source language into a target language. Many of you would be thinking, what exactly are these terms, source language and target language? Let's take an example of a conference. For example, a conference on Hindi literature is taking place in India, and all the panelist speakers are speaking in Hindi. And in the audience, we have people who are English speakers, who are Tamil speakers. And for example, I'm an interpreter over there. So my task would be to convey the message from Hindi to English and Tamil. So here, Hindi is the source language, and Tamil and English are the target languages. So a source language is a language that's translated orally or interpreted, and the target language is the language in which we actually convey the message into. So may I have the next slide, please? Okay, so as we have got the crux of what exactly interpretation is, we will get to know what are the different types of interpretation. Firstly, we have heard this term called conference interpretation. It's also written in the first slide that our panelists and mentors are conference interpreters. We also call it simultaneous interpretation. As the term suggests, simultaneous interpretation is an interpretation which happens simultaneously, in which there are no breaks. This is something which is quite common in big conferences of organizations like World Health Organization, United Nations, its different committees, European Union. So what happens exactly is that the delegates would be speaking, and simultaneously a team of interpreters would be interpreting the message of the delegates into different official languages. And this all happens simultaneously. There is no gap. So this is something which requires a lot of concentration. Secondly, we have consecutive interpretation. And as the name suggests, this is an interpretation which happens consecutively. For example, a conference is taking place and the speaker is addressing an audience and they don't share a common language. So the speaker is accompanied by some interpreter. So now the speaker will speak for around 5 to 10 minutes. Then he will take a pause of around 3 to 4 minutes. And in that pause, the interpreter will come, speak what the speaker has said into the target language. And then again, the speaker will come, speak, take a pause, and then this will be followed by the interpreter. In consecutive interpretation, the interpreter takes notes when the speaker is speaking, and with the help of those notes, those points, he put forwards what the speaker has said. So all this happens in a consecutive manner. That's why we call it consecutive interpretation. Then comes whispered interpretation, which also was mentioned by our moderator, Mr. Ravi sir. So as the name suggests, whispered interpretation is something which requires whispering, but this is not something 100% true. This is something which happens in bilateral meetings, in closed meetings between two diplomats. For example, let's think that a meeting is taking place between an Indian diplomat and a Chinese diplomat. So both the diplomats will be accompanied by their interpreters. So when the Chinese diplomat will be saying something, the Indian interpreter will interpret the message and whisper the message into the ears of the Indian diplomat. And the same thing will be done by the Chinese interpreter. So this sort of interpretation happens with the process called whispering. The main reason or the main important thing about whispered interpretation is that the interpreters say the message in a very low volume so as to not disturb the other speakers. Then comes the over the phone interpretation, which was also mentioned by Mr. Ravi sir. So in over the phone interpretation, what happens is that interpretation happens off site. Okay, for example, I'm a client and I speak English and I will be having a meeting on phone with a Japanese speaker on something important related to my business. So I will hire an over the phone interpreter. Then I'll call my counterpart who is a Japanese speaker, and I'll also let the interpreter join our call on a conference call. So when I'll be speaking, my interpreter will be interpreting the message into Chinese. And when the Chinese counterpart will speak something, my interpreter will convert or interpret that message into English. So in this way, over the phone interpretation works. Then comes the relay interpretation. Now, this is something very interesting, which, according to my research, was something I really found very interesting. Now, relay interpretation is actually indirect interpretation. I'll give you an example. For example, a Chinese conference is taking place in India, and the audience consists of speakers who speak English and Hindi. So there will be two teams of interpreters. Let's say we have team A and team B. Now, when the Chinese speakers will be saying their messages, their statements, one team, say team A of interpreters, will be interpreting that message into English, and then that message will be broadcasted to all the English speakers. Now, team B of interpreters won't listen to the Chinese speakers. They will listen to what the English interpreters had interpreted, and now they will use that message to interpret directly into Hindi. So in this way, the indirect interpretation is taking place from Chinese to English and from English to Hindi. Then comes the liaison interpretation. Now, this is something very common, very informal sort of interpretation. This is something probably you would have done for your grandparents also if they don't share the same language as you, like English or Tamil or any another Indian language. So in liaison interpretation, you as an interpreter accompany your client for small meetings, and you instantly interpret the message between the client and the speakers, and between the speakers and the client. So liaison interpretation is something very common, and it doesn't require any tool, any note making, etc. At last comes the sign language interpretation. You would have also seen it in many news channels, in films, in documentaries. So what happens in sign language interpretation is that there are interpreters who, with the help of the body language, the facial expressions, the hand movements, they try to interpret what the speakers are saying, And with the help of their body movements, they interpret that message into a sign language which is comprehended by the deaf audience. So sign language interpretation is something very important for people who cannot hear, who cannot speak, who can just understand this sign language. And also one important point, there are different sign languages for different countries. For example, if you are interacting with the deaf people of, say, a country like Ireland, so you would require an Irish sign language interpreter, not Indian sign language interpreter. But if you wish to interact with the Indian people, Indian audience which is deaf but which understands the Indian sign language, so you will require Indian sign language interpreters. Can I have the next slide, please?
Yes. Before we move ahead, Ashok,
Yes, sir.
I wanted to check if Preeti or Padma, Natrajan is here. Any of them could come.
Okay.
Preeti, are you there? Padma, are you there?
Hello.
Yes, Padma, I just wanted to ask you, Ashok has just explained a kind of, variety of, options, or broadly he has divided, into some category of interpreting. I was just wondering that broadly, if we can simply say there are two types of interpretation, one is consecutive and another is simultaneous, right? So what is the kind of do you find there is a big difference between the two, or are they equal, or it needs a bigger level of experience and expertise to become conference interpreter? What is your take on that?
Yeah, there is a difference.
Yeah.
For example, I did consecutive for many years before I went in for simultaneous interpretation. It's just maybe just a confidence thing also. It's after many years. That's because I'm not a trained interpreter.
Hmm.
It's when I was doing consecutive for almost 15 years that I started doing simultaneous. But
Right.
when I started doing it, then I felt that it's not that different. It's just that you don't take notes. Like Ashok explained, the methodology is different, but the groundwork, the preparation, getting familiar with the vocabulary, the glossary, all that remains the same.
Mhm.
The common factor is that in any kind of interpretation, whatever work you do, unlike in translation, happens before the event.
Right. So,
Before the, yeah.
yes. So that means, as per your understanding, uh, you know, uh, broadly, there is no big difference between consecutive and simultaneous.
I would not say that, Ravi.
It is just a kind of mindset or preparedness of your mind, that matters. Because I recall when I was doing interpretation, I first started as a kind of interpreting for tourists. I used to take tourists from the airport and take them to hotel, settle them, and if needed, I used to follow them with the tour group. The guide used to explain them whatever they wanted to know, and my duty was to ensure that whatever guide is explaining is heard by everybody in their language, right? So slowly and slowly I built up a kind of confidence in me that I can do this activity. Similarly, when I started working for embassy, I started interacting with lots of native Latin Americans, and then my confidence level jumped. It became more better. Translation as well as interpretation. I recall I handled even the presidential visit of President Fujimori from Peru when he came to India in 1996-97. And then, I don't know why, but I created a kind of mental barrier that I cannot do simultaneous interpretation. And that barrier continued for 5 years. And when I went to Spain to do my specialization in teaching Spanish as a foreign language, and when I started interacting with natives, the confidence built up, next 10-15 days only. And when I came back, I was totally a changed person. And suddenly I got an opportunity and I did interpretation in one go, simultaneous interpretation. I'm telling you, in one go, for Prime Minister Manmohan Singh ji, for then Finance Minister Pranavda, and then Commerce Minister Anand Sharma ji, Vice President Hamid Ansari ji. All I had done this in one go, in one day, and that gave me. And more challenging part was when there are lots of speakers who speak quite in a comfort zone, slowly and with compose, with confidence. But there are some speakers who have prepared themselves too much, and when there is a delegation coming in, they have very limited time, because everybody has given some slot. Suppose I have prepared for 1 hour and I'm giving only 10 minutes time, and I want to say everything. What will happen? I will speed up my talk. And when you are doing interpretation at that phase of time, it's very tough, So I ended up, doing interpretation for 8 foreign ministers' head, from Central America in front of Manmohan Singh ji. And I recall that minister, I don't recall his name, but it was very tough for me because he was, Spanish speaking people, they speak, natives speak very fast in Spanish. And when they have 10 minutes to finish, and they have 1 hour of talk to give, because they know it has to be put in agenda that I talk there. And he has to prove that, whatever he has spoken was, what was he prepared was spoken in front of the PM. So he's not going to talk less, He has to finish that 1 hour thing, and he did it, And it was a kind of, for me, I recall, a real challenge. So in that phase of time, I believe your confidence plus presence of mind plus your kind of training, domain expertise, everything matters. Because if you lose confidence there, the whole interpreting exercise will go in totally different direction, and you will embarrass yourself and you will embarrass the whole country. So how you handle this, Padma?
I think you've already answered. First
No,
of all,
I want to understand, this, many times people believe that, yeah, bolna hi to hai, when clients approach you, they say, kuch karna nahi hai, sirf bolna hai, bas, right? And aapko bas, we will give you, say, some 5,000 rupees, it's a big deal, So how do you handle this situation? Because I believe all the comers, who are into consecutive as well as who plan to aspire to become conference interpreter, everybody wants to do well in life, because conference interpreters are generally paid quite well. In international market, I recall it is $800 to $1,000 for a day. In Indian market, the cost is at least 15,000 to 25,000 or 30,000 rupees for a day. It is a good deal, So how to achieve that, from being a fresher to that stage? There is a journey to follow. I know that you have been quite active in pursuing your journey. How you see this for a fresher, for a newcomer who are not into the system, Padmaji, please.
See, my own personal journey, I think a lot of it I owe to translation, because I used to do translations on a daily basis. So I had a whole lot of useless, so-called useless vocabulary inside my head, because I had worked on various domains, almost everything conceivable, and even some totally unimaginable subjects. So I had built up a whole lot of vocabulary by the time I started simultaneous interpretation. Plus, I had done a lot of consecutive interpretations, etc. So I think all that really helped me. So first of all, your language has to be really good. Your command over both the languages, both the source language and the target language has to be really good. You have to have a really rich vocabulary in order to make your way out of difficult or sticky situations. Like Ravi was saying, sometimes you really in simultaneous or conference interpretation, you don't have the time to think. You don't have the time to look for a term. You don't have time to do anything. You don't have time to even consult your own glossary when the speaker is speaking because you're totally focused. Your mind cannot stray. He mentioned all these things. So I think it's just the command over the language that you have, your confidence, your experience. And in my case, it was all the translation experience. I realized while interpreting that there were all these terms which are still there in my head somewhere, which would come out, when I really needed it. So it's a skill that you have to keep honing and perfecting. You can't do it overnight, but you can keep practicing. There are some people that I have trained, even informally. So even if you listen to speeches on YouTube and you wear your headset like this, and on your phone you can record, you can keep trying to do things like that, and then you listen back to it. These things help because the people that I've trained found it really very useful. And first of all, figure out about, supposing you're working on environment, then prepare your glossary, read up on it. I do a lot of reading up before an assignment so that all that goes into your head. I read up in both the languages because I do English to French and French to English. So I read a whole lot of stuff. It's already there inside me. On top of that, you prepare a targeted glossary. So you go well armed and well prepared. And for the rest, it's command over the language, confidence, not panicking. All these things are so important.
So Padma, we will come back again on more of aspects of interpreting. I wanted to check with Dr. Preeti. Bhatia is there. Preeti, are you there? Are you in a position to explain something on this skill development transition from a student to a consecutive to a translator, and from translator to a consecutive interpreter, and from consecutive interpreter to conference interpreter? Preeti, could you like to explain? Please go ahead. Unmute yourself and then please explain. Preeti, we are listening. We want to listen.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
You can.
Your camera is not on. Yes.
Now it's on.
Now yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Preeti,
I want to first of all thank you for inviting me here today.
please.
And now to come back to this topic that you had mentioned, how does a student go from being a student or a language student to translation, and then from translation to consecutive interpreter, and then from consecutive to simultaneous interpreter? There are stages. So first stage is mastery over your working languages. It's what we call them, the languages that you use to work with, which is your source language and your target language, whatever they may be. But you need complete mastery. As has been said by both Ravi and Padma, unless you have full mastery over the languages, you cannot interpret for the simple reason that it takes time, if you're not completely master these languages, to find the word. But when you're interpreting, both in the case of consecutive as well as simultaneous, you don't have the time. So if you have not completely mastered the language, you will not going to succeed 100% as an interpreter. So first thing as a language student is master the languages, which takes a long time. This also includes perhaps going and spending a few months in the place where your second language is spoken. It could be an Indian language. For example, I may know Hindi and maybe I would like to learn Tamil. Maybe I say, because I find a lot of people who say, we know the languages, we can do it. Have you lived there? Do you know their culture? Do you know their traditions? Because as these assignments keep coming up, And in India, there are more of freelance interpreters, very few full-time interpreters. What happens is that people can come up with anything which is attached to their tradition and their culture. If you are not aware of it, if you have not spent time with people whose native language is your second language, you may misunderstand what they're saying, and therefore the translation that you're going to give or what you're going to interpret is going to come out wrong, and that other person who you're interpreting for will not understand what you're saying. First thing, therefore, is the mastery of the language. Once that is done, you have to go in for a formal language of a translation course in languages where you are taught the methodology of translation. Having done that, it is now up to you to keep practicing in order to keep gaining more and more information on general knowledge and improving your language skills, learning your vocabulary all the time, as Padma has just mentioned. Once that is done, it is preferable to do a course in interpretation where you learn the subtleties of consecutive interpretation, the way note taking is done. It is not shorthand. Okay, there is a method involved. So you have to learn that method. That takes time. Once that is done, practice that for some time, and then you need to do another course in simultaneous interpretation, because here again, there are certain methodologies which are used. And once you've understood that, then you can start doing the simultaneous interpretation. So this is to take you through right from the time when you're a language student up to the stage of simultaneous interpretation. Believe me, it takes a lot of hard work. Like Padma was saying, she was doing it for several years and she was doing translation on a daily basis before she actually attempted simultaneous interpretation. And before that, she was also consecutively interpreting. So there's a lot of hard work involved, and it takes many years. Do not think that you can jump into it, overnight. It's going to take time. I hope I've answered your question.
Yes, Preeti, that's great. We will come back more on, how to train ourselves, how to train our brain, how to learn to take cognitive load. I recall how to hydrate yourself by drinking more water, how to control yourself within that cabin and set, etc. Let's come back to Ashok, who wanted to share more about where to learn all these, training programs, including where these deployments of interpreters take place, etc. Ashok, to you, please.
Okay, sir. Can I have this slide on courses on interpretation studies in India?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Yeah. So before I tell you about what kind of courses you can pursue in India to become an interpreter, let me clarify that in India, there are no particular courses to become a proper certified, qualified interpreter. When I pursued my summer internship in Belgium on Francophone culture, I was quite astonished to find that in Belgium, in almost every European country, and also in US and Canada, there are courses of bachelor's and master's level dedicated solely to translation and interpretation. Whereas in India, we have courses of masters in translation, but we don't have courses of masters in interpretation or some sort of diplomas in interpretation. So in India, what happens is that students generally clear the language proficiency tests up to a very high level, and then they pursue some sort of short vocational course on interpretation from abroad, and then work as an interpreter in India for some government organization, etc. In India, normally we have Jawaharlal Nehru University, whose School of Language, Literature and Culture Studies provides different certificate, diploma, graduation, masters, MPhil and PhD level courses for different languages like Japanese, Chinese, Spanish, French, and also languages like Pashto, uh, Arabian, and Persian. We have also a Central Institute of English and Foreign Languages, also known as IFLU, English and Foreign Languages University, which also provides uh, courses at diploma, graduation, masters, and doctorate for different languages. We have University of Delhi with the same catalog, University of Mumbai, which provides courses for French and German. We have Banaras Hindu University, the same catalog, and we have National Institute of Speech and Hearing, which provides its one-year diploma in Indian Sign Language and Interpretation course. And you can pursue this course after.
Ashok, you have to unmute yourself. You have muted yourself. Yeah.
Normally,
Yes, better.
students do their graduation or advanced diploma, and then after that they work as interpreters for BPOs for multinational companies in India. After that, there are some students who are studious who also complete their masters, PhD, and then work for the Indian government or organizations of international reputation. So, talking about the different areas which constantly require interpreter roles, the first point is about multinational companies. Companies like Amazon, Infosys, TCS, automobile companies like Mercedes and Honda, they always require interpreters for their different foreign languages. Some of my seniors have been working as Chinese, French, and Spanish interpreters at Amazon at their campus in Hyderabad. And some of my German speaking friends have worked at Mercedes Benz. So these companies, these multinational companies require students who are quite adept at foreign languages. And the basic eligibility is graduation or some specific proficiency level test which they have to clear. For example, for a Honda company, they require graduates in any discipline, but with JLPT N2. Okay, we have the next point on tourism sector. So companies like LBF Travels require students who are Spanish graduates, and Shanti Travels is a tourism company which also hires students who are French graduates. So in tourism, we have a lot of opportunity to work as interpreters. There are international meets and events like Olympics, Asian and Commonwealth Games, international summits like G20 Summit, World Economic Forum, etc., which require interpreters at a very large number. Why? Because in these meets, there are people from almost every part of the world. So to facilitate the communication between the delegates, between the different participants and attendees, they require interpreters. Okay, Indian government and its different ministries like the departments of tourism and cultural ministries require interpreters. Why? Because since India is a tourism destination, and because of its culture, it attracts people from distant parts of the globe. For example, if I tell you the example of the place where I come from, we have this place called Rishikesh in Uttarakhand. So every year, International Yoga Festival is held in Rishikesh, and it sees a flux of around 10 to 15,000 people from almost every part of the world, from countries like Egypt, Japan, Spain, Europe, US, Canada. So they do also require interpreters. Then we have international BPOs, which require simple graduates who have graduation degree in languages. And we also require medical interpreters in hospitals. I'll tell you an example. In Delhi, a lot of patients from the Middle East and the Arabian countries come for their medical processes and medical checkups. So hospitals in Delhi require students who are graduates in Persian and Urdu studies from universities like Jamia Millia, from Aligarh Muslim University, from JNU. So yes, we do have a lot of demand for medical interpreters in India. Sir, may I have the next slide, please?
Yes, Ashok, 1 minute.
Yeah.
Ashok, before we enter into the next phase, I would like to intervene here. Allow me to intervene because there are some points, I wanted to add a little bit more.
Okay.
And that is, Ashok has explained some university names like Delhi University, Jawaharlal University, IFLU, Mumbai University, etc. Please understand, all these universities, to my knowledge, they do not have a specialized, program called interpreting. We have 1 or 2 papers, one subject in which we undergo training, number 1. I recall in Jawaharlal University, it has a very good lab. There you do practice, you do drills, and you do variety of, permutation and combination with trainers, recording, feedback. But this kind of lab is not available perhaps in Delhi University, neither it is available in other parts of the India, which perhaps it has. Uh, as per my also knowledge, coming from while interacting with our expert, Dr. Preeti Bhatia, I learned that some facilities of this kind are also available in Pune as well as Pondicherry. But labs, it's very costly affair, But now that there has been a very drastic change in the technology, perhaps instead of big labs and recording, etc., now you only need you know kind of telephone and some technological gadgets. Luckily, in Modlingua we have all these gadgets, because we have been planning to introduce interpreting course for long, and now we are all set after this summer internship program. We are all set to launch some good courses. We have already launched some courses on translation management. We are planning to launch 2 additional courses. One is on translation and another is on interpreting, consecutive as well as simultaneous. So we will talk more about that. But there is one additional aspect, Ashok, that I wanted to add a little bit more. The tourism sector of India, and India being a multilingual country, we need interpreters everywhere. We need interpreters at the monuments. We need interpreters at at shrines. We need interpreters at hotels. We need interpreters at discotheques. We need interpreters while shopping. And tourism sector, in India has been booming and growing. On average, there has been, at least 10 to 12, percent contribution in GDP growth. With development of infrastructure in medical facilities, coming up, world-class hospitals, India has become a hub now for doing medical care, including yoga therapy, natural therapy and all, and it is growing. So in last 10 years, there has been a tremendous growth in, this sector, medical tourism. And luckily, people from Afghanistan, Middle East, neighboring countries, they come in big number to India, including Bangladesh and all. And there we need good number of medical interpreters and facilitators, And many times when you are into this field and sector, you get experience and you end up becoming entrepreneurs, and you launch your own medical facilitation centers. I am aware of some good translators and interpreters in the sector who have launched their, medical tourism entrepreneurship, and they are doing quite well. With this, I would like to come back to Ashok. Ashok, are you there? And discuss on our next agenda that Ashok was already doing. I just wanted to intervene and add some points, for clarification for our people who are watching us and those who have interest, in tourism, interpreting. They both can be mixed, You can do variety of permutation combinations with your career, with tourism as well as medical tourism or yoga tourism or conference interpreting for all these events, or even an event management company,
Yeah.
This can happen when you are into it, you become part of it, and you learn while doing things. Okay. So, Ashok, please.
Yes, sir. So can I have the next slide, please?
Right. Yeah. Yes.
Okay. So right now I'll be talking about some renowned interpreters who have worked in India. So in these 2 photos, you can see a lady wearing a brown coat in the first photo and a red colored coat in the second photo. Now she is Mrs. Gurdeep Kaur Chawla, who started as an Hindi language interpreter in the Indian Parliament in 1990, but now she is a US citizen and she has interpreted for our Honorable Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi, Mr. Justin Trudeau from Canada, and also Mr. Donald Trump and Mr. Barack Obama. and she interprets between English and Hindi. May I have the next slide, please? Yes. Okay, now you can spot a lady sitting just behind Mr. Narendra Modi. She is a 2012 batch passed out IFS officer, Indian Foreign Services officer. Her name is Priyanka Sohani. And just after completing her commission, her training in IFS cadre, she went on to work in the Indian Embassy in Beijing, and there she pursued some intensive language course in Chinese studies. And now she also works as an interpreter for our Honorable Prime Minister. The next slide, please. Okay, now you can see a lady sitting beside Mr. Donald Trump. Her name is Marina Gross, and she is an interpreter for the US president, and she interprets between Russian language and the English language. The next slide, please. With this last slide, I would like to thank you everyone for attending this webinar, for going through my presentation, and for your patience hearing. And at last, I would just say, keep learning at Modlingua. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Ashok, for this wonderful session and explaining the ABC of interpreting business, right, and interpreting activity. But now let's come back to adding some more value in terms of how to make a career, out of it, number one, and how to develop some more skill sets so that it can help, our, viewers as well as our friends who are watching us, because I noticed that there are lots of aspirants who are translators, who are language professionals, who are translators, and who are learning and who want to become good interpreters in future. Because if you plan in advance, you do well. So I would like to invite Dr. Preeti Bhatia who has also done PhD in interpreting in India. Her topic is very interesting because it's a unique kind of PhD. Her book is also now available on Amazon. You can you can explore. Dr. Preeti, are you there? Please, Dr. Preeti.
Yes, Ravi, I am here.
Yeah, please. Carry on your,
Yeah. So you wanted me to, first of all, explain what are the differences between translation and interpretation.
Right, a broad difference, but we want to know more on how to build on, number one, and develop a strategy to train yourself slowly, and enter into the profession, because lots of people are not able to understand what it is and how to enter. Entry point is very important.
Let me explain.
And also, you would like to share some data about whatever research that you did, on interpreting, how tough, how good, or how bad it is, in Indian context, if possible.
I don't know if you want an honest answer on that. Anyway, let me first start by explaining to you what is the difference to everybody. What is the difference between translation and interpretation? As Ravi had said right at the beginning, translation is written, interpretation is spoken. Sounds easy. It isn't. You see, main difference is that the translators sit in one place, they translate, they get time. They have time to do it. They have time to do their research on the topic. They have time to check with dictionaries, glossaries, or even people, or look for other options in order to find the correct terminology. They have the time. After they finish the translation, again they have time. They have time to make corrections, make revisions, do a revision, edit it, polish it up, show it to somebody if needed, get their approval, and then go ahead and submit it. This is not at all true for the interpreter. That's one basic difference. The interpreter is not all alone or with a group of people in one room sitting with dictionaries and glossaries, and as Padma had said earlier, simply doesn't have the time to go through either dictionary or glossary or even ask somebody. So the vocabulary has to be in the head. As Padma had said earlier, it's already in the head. You don't think about it. You need to immediately come up with it. In fact, you need to think in the language in which you interpret. If you don't do that, you are going to have problems because the words will not come quickly. You're going to waste time thinking about it and therefore miss out on what the speaker says. Thereby, by doing this, you are also going to lose out on some important details mentioned by the speaker, which the speaker wants to get across. Now, the main objective of both translation and interpretation, I agree, is to help people understand each other. But how is that going to help if you're going to lose out on important information that the speaker wants to tell you? Second main difference, the translator is, like I had mentioned earlier, on his own. Right? So is the interpreter. Very often the interpreters work in teams of 2 or 3, as they do in the UN, but they don't seem to be doing that very often in India. As unfortunately, very often I have come across instances where interpreters work alone and for long stretches of time. Now, when this happens, it really reduces the quality of interpretation because scientific studies have already proved that one person cannot interpret for more than 20 minutes because of the amount of concentration involved in listening. And this is the process of interpretation, right? Doing this at the same time. So you listen, absorb, understand, reformulate, and speak. And when you speak, you have to listen not only to the speaker who's already speaking, but also to yourself to make sure that you finish your sentences and that you're making sense. So these are things which are simply not very, very easy. And these are things which have to be done in interpretation simultaneously. Whether it is consecutive or whether it is simultaneous doesn't make a difference. You do not have the time to do this. Translation, you do. Next difference. The translator sits with himself, with the document and with books, whether it's a dictionary or a glossary or whatever. Sits with documents, texts. Does not need person-to-person skills. Interpreter. You are interacting with people. You are interacting with high-level dignitaries. You are interacting with normal people. You have to have the ability to talk to people and to do it in a particular manner. It could be formal, it could be informal, it could be however, but it cannot be, you have to be properly groomed. You can't just wear anything because you're just sitting there. Whereas a translator can do that. He can just wear whatever he wants. He can be in his pajamas, he can do his work. The interpreter can't. Has to be properly groomed. The interpreter cannot afford to be an introvert. The translator can. Because the translator does not talk directly to the client. Very often, the translator will go through somebody who has given him a translation work, and that somebody is going to be interacting with the client. The other main important thing is diction. It's not just knowing your vocabulary. It's being, the other people who you're talking to have to be able to understand you. So you have to, as an interpreter, be a very good speaker. As a translator, you have to be a good writer because you need to write properly. So these are, I agree, different parts of language, but they are different and you have to be good at them. You can't, when you're an interpreter, for example, say, yeah, so, what was that word I was looking for? See, you can't do things like that. So in the meantime, you've already forgotten a whole bunch of details which the speaker's been trying to give out. So that is the next very, very important. Next point. The interpreters can and sometimes do suffer from what I would call stage fright. Because you are on stage. Whether it's in a conference or whether you're sitting next to a high-level dignitary or the head of a CEO, multinational CEO, in a press conference, you are on stage. So you cannot afford to have stage fright. You have to have the presence of mind to carry on with your work. And you have to be able to concentrate in these conditions. Believe me, it's very, very stressful. These are some of there are many, many more, but these are some of the very, very important differences between translation and interpretation. Yeah.
So,
What was the other?
Preeti, thanks that you said, in interpreting, the I will just give you on a kind of a sketch. Perhaps Padma will agree to it. And that sketch is that we have to take cognitive load, means you receive the information in your brain, right? You process it, and then again you reprocess it from a storage that you have, and then comes out, the another language, and this series continues, like processor. Your mind is like, receiving and storing, processing, and then giving output. And in that phase of time, if you have any hindrance in your mind, then you are gone. Because it will be kind of short circuit, in the brain. So this is a trick, of how to play with your processor well. And in that trick, that is very, very important, which I as interpreter have learned, and that is to have as much vocabulary as possible in both the languages, and keep yourself updated, at least with the current affairs in throughout the globe. Because a politician, especially when you are doing political interpretation, a shrewd politician can interlink anything from any part of the world, and at that phase of time, if you are not aware of the context, you may be able to do wrong interpretation, or you may get slow. And the moment you are slow in interpreting, it will have a very bad effect on your morale. You will go down, and then again another series of problems will start. And for doing all these situations, you do not have get time, to control it. So let's come back to Padma, I have seen her many times in various international conferences, including lots of VIPs. Ashok had not put her photograph, in that lady's front, but I see Padma has more photographs of that kind. So let's see, Padma, how you take on that, in while developing your skill as interpreter.
I think as I told you, Ravi, I think it's something that keeps building over time. You keep learning all the time. Sometimes interpreters should also record themselves while they are interpreting and listen to it and see where they could improve. I think it's a process. It's a continuous learning process. And one thing that all of us have not have forgotten to mention, Preeti did talk about it briefly. Usually, you're not alone in your booth. You're not alone. You have a colleague with you, and you take turns to do simultaneous interpretation. So it's actually a teamwork. So you should be able to work as a team. That's also very important. If one interpreter has a difficulty, the other one can take over, or at least provide a word that the person is not coming up with. Could just write it down very discreetly, or figures, stuff like that. You should help each other out. And I think that's how as far as coping with stress is concerned, that's that's a skill that you absolutely need to possess. Like Preeti said, you can't afford to have stage fright. One thing that I always believe is that an interpreter should never forget the fact that we are just a medium. The limelight is not on us. So there is no point having stage fright. We are there to be a medium to convey what our delegates want to convey, and we should be very conscious of it and be very sincere about what we are doing. Forget about everything else, about how many people are there, press conference, stress, you have high level dignitaries sitting right next to you. Forget all that. Just focus on what you have to do. That's what I try to do. I try not to let the stress get to me. And I drink lots of water, like you were saying.
So that is great, Padma. Before I come back to Preeti as well as Ashok again, let me come back to our people who are watching us and see if they have any questions, any opinion which they are saying. I noticed that we have Mr. Lakshman Singh Rawat saying very, very good evening to all. And the session was very good. I see Jaya Lakshmi saying, I am a translator. In case of translation, we do not know any word, we can manage it with dictionary. But what if we could not find any word during interpretation? How do we manage it? That's a good question. Mr. Paneer Selvanme is saying, you have forgotten to mention Pondicherry Central University, which has MA department. Mr. Selvanme, we have added it later, because our friend Ashok was not aware of Pondicherry. He is sitting in Uttarakhand in Doon University, undergraduate student. Therefore, we are here to add some more information. Atya, no mention of Russian language. Yes, there is a mention of Russian language. We have seen, Vladimir Putin and our President Trump, from US being facilitated by, interpreter. And if you start talking about mentioning languages, India has 1600 languages. That would take at least, full 2 sessions to just mention the name of those languages. So, and the idea is to understand the concept. Don't focus too much on, those details. You didn't mention my language or that language or this language. The idea is we have not mentioned even Hindi here, but Hindi is the most important language for India currently. Similarly, Lakshman Singh is saying we have translation bureau, etc. Yeah, right. In government departments, Ministry of External Affairs hires good number of interpreters. Ministry of Home Affairs hires good number of interpreters. Parliament has, good number of interpreters, But the problem is proper structured training program is not there. And generally we learn by doing things, learn from peers, learn through mentors. Padma mentors so many interpreters. She takes newcomers with her, introduces them to the system, and then, they learn and pick up, that way it goes. And Anindita Rao is saying the Indian Parliament hires interpreter. Yes. So that way, Sharmila is also saying Padma Natrajan ma'am's leadway is not clear. There is some issue perhaps, on speed front, but the idea is to have more clear message, which is very loud and clear. I believe we'll try and improve upon in the next session. And, Iris and all my friends, thank you very much for being here and sharing your opinion and thoughts and, about what you were saying and whatever you explained. So now my question, before we close, Padma, to you is how you handle when you forget, the vocabulary.
That's why I said that you have to have, your language has to be, command over the language has to be so good that you can work your way around it. You manage to convey the message. You might not find one particular word, but you can still convey the message.
Yes, because, we do not see any speech or any line in isolation from the context we are talking in.
Absolutely.
If in that particular context, if, for example, if you forget one word and you start thinking about that, you will lose 100 words, So forget about, you cannot produce 100% interpretation. Just remember, it is hardly, even if you are able to produce 40%, it is considered good, no? What do you say, Padma, on that?
I try for 100%, Ravi. And I think Sometimes I have managed 90, 100%. See, the thing is, if you do not get a word, words do not convey the message.
Right. It's a series of words
Can,
that
it's
can.
a, yeah, it's the idea. So you can always convey it. Meanwhile, you can write down the word, ask you, and your colleague can look it up in the dictionary and provide it to you so that the next time around when the word comes, you can translate it properly, interpret it properly. So there are
Great.
various ways that, we use various methods to not allow these things to hinder the flow of interpretation.
That is great. So I guess on this particular part, Dr. Preeti Bhatia also wants to add something. Preeti, are you there?
Yes, Ravi, I am there.
Yes, please, please.
Okay. I just wanted to add a few things.
Your camera is not on.
I don't know why this is not working. Can you hear me?
Yes, no problem. You can just simply say.
Sorry, I didn't count it.
Right. So Preeti is
so what
adding
I wanted
her
to add
opinion.
was,
1 minute. Yeah, Preeti is adding her opinion.
so
Let's listen to her before we close for the day. Yeah, please.
What I wanted to do was add on to what Padma is saying.
Right.
40% interpretation may not actually be good enough because you're losing out on a lot of information,
Right.
which is not fair to the speaker. It's not fair to the audience. So we do strive for 100% interpretation. And if you know the correct methodology of doing it, you would understand immediately that it is not, the words are not important. It is the message which is important. So if you have mastery of the language, exactly what she said, you will easily find a way of getting away with it, finding another way around it. Message will go across, message has to go across. There is no chance for, I can't find the word. This is not an excuse. The other thing I wanted to talk about was, the languages that were mentioned. You haven't spoken of Russian or this or that. Frankly, I would not even speak of French, even though I have done my PhD in French. I am a French interpreter. However, we must understand that the languages required by the market today are very different from what they were earlier. So if you're talking about 30 years hence, I would say things have changed drastically. Today, you no longer need those languages. What you need are Hindi language. You need probably Gujarati, you need Tamil, you need Bengali, you need Marathi, you need Punjabi. All right. You also need Hindi to Punjabi or Hindi to Tamil, which is what people don't understand. Not only that, where foreign languages are concerned, Asian languages are beginning to play a bigger role. For example, Korean. You have Japanese, which is becoming very, very important. Do you know that the Japanese are actually learning Hindi because the Hindi speakers don't know Japanese and they cannot possibly communicate. So since we don't know it and we don't have good enough interpreters, they are now learning Hindi in order to communicate with us. So we need Hindi, we need Thai, we need Korean, which are very, very essential. So the entire focus of the market where demand for languages has totally changed. That has to be kept in mind. It's not today just Russian, French, or German. It's a lot more than that.
That is great, Preeti. It is a good point that you have pointed out. Perhaps I'm sure this wisdom has come through your research.
Yes, it has.
That tells that the importance of Indian languages has grown very high.
And is poised to grow further.
Yes,
Ravi, if I
and
may
in last 10 years, I believe I have also seen this kind of a change, and the strength, my strength, which was Hindi as a native speaker, I had not explored earlier. But I got an opportunity and I explored it and I found it very well, because now I being, Spanish speaker, Spanish speaking people will never give me importance for that. But I being a native speaker for Hindi, I am given importance, and I receive lots of calls from Spain or Germany or from France or even from US to do interpretation in Hindi and English, and I have done so and enjoyed, the company of variety of dignitaries and had a good time, doing interpreting and traveling around, So I believe it is a good formula, if you are not expert, let's say in French or German or, foreign languages, Even if you have comfortable expertise in English and your native language, I believe there is a way out for doing interpretation. So with this, I would like to express my sincere thanks to all our panelist experts and friend Padma as well as Preeti, and a special thanks to Ashok, who has brought in this topic very well, and and above and all, to all my friends who have been watching us today at YouTube channel, and who are our well-wishers and who have been promoting our channel to their friends. And I'm sure this video is going to give them a good input. And luckily, I believe this particular webinar is a very unique in the sense that we are three interpreters talking together on interpreting, and we have a future interpreter waiting for us in waiting from Dun University, who is a very versatile intern and very active, and I wish him all the best and best wishes to all our viewers, and thanks for being with us. Thank you, my friends. Hope we will have more opportunities to interact very soon when we launch our interpreting courses. Preeti, our trainer, will be there. And of course, Padma is our mentor and friend who is part of our all activities, and she will also be helping us. I see Anandita Rao there, Sharmila there, all key interpreters of India are watching us. And thank you for showing confidence in us. And I see some key interpreters from abroad also. Euridia is there. I see Reg is there, Iris there. I mean, it's a very proud moment to share. And thank you again, my friends. Bye-bye.